The night had fallen heavy over the city, and a steady drizzle glossed the streets with slick reflections of neon signs and passing headlights. Rain pattered rhythmically against the pavement, pooling in little rivers along the curbs, carrying with it the smell of wet asphalt, and the faint aroma of street food from nearby vendors. In the midst of this urban symphony of dampness and light, a high-end downtown restaurant glowed warmly, its polished windows reflecting the interior's golden light. Inside, the air was cozy, scented with roasted meats, buttered pastries, and a faint hint of expensive coffee. The hum of conversation and clinking of cutlery provided a soft, constant background, a muted counterpoint to the downpour outside. In a quiet corner, seated alone at a large table, the millionaire CEO surveyed the remnants of a lavish dinner. He had attended a string of meetings that day, navigated a maze of contracts, negotiations and boardroom battles, and now, seated beneath the warm glow of the chandelier, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing against his shoulders. The table around him was scattered with untouched dishes, a fillet of fish still glistening under a fine sauce, a mound of roasted vegetables, and a dessert plate holding a perfectly shaped chocolate mousse that he had no energy to savor. Every dish was an emblem of his wealth, yet at that moment it felt hollow. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his perfectly combed hair, eyes wandering to the rain-streaked windows. The city outside seemed vast and indifferent, headlights streaming through the dark as pedestrians hurried under umbrellas. A small figure paused at the restaurant entrance, a tiny silhouette outlined by the dim streetlights. The little girl, no more than 7 years old, looked in from the wet streets, her coat damp and clinging to her frame. Her shoes were worn, her hair plastered to her forehead with rain, and her eyes were wide and hesitant, taking in the warm glow and the rich smells that spilled faintly through the door. She shifted on her small feet, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The CEO's gaze lingered on her longer than he intended. Something tugged at him. Perhaps fatigue, perhaps the rare intrusion of compassion, or perhaps simply the recognition of human needs staring him directly in the face. He gestured subtly toward the waiter, his voice calm but firm. He requested that the leftovers from his dinner, every bit of food left on his plates, be wrapped up and sent to the girl. It was a small act, barely a ripple in the world of his immense wealth, but in that moment, it carried a weight that neither he nor the waiter could fully articulate. The little girl, meanwhile, hesitated near the doorway. She had learned caution through countless days navigating streets that offered little mercy. Hunger had become a constant companion, but so had wariness. She took a tentative step inside, her tiny shoes squeaking slightly on the wet floor. She did not know if this was real, if this warmth and abundance could possibly be hers, or if it was a fleeting illusion she had conjured in desperation. Her small hands clutched her coat, and her gaze flickered between the polished floors, the golden light, and the table where the man sat alone. The waiter returned quietly, holding a neatly wrapped bundle. He extended it toward her, and for a moment, the little girl froze. Her eyes widened as she reached out cautiously, fingers brushing against the paper, unsure if it was safe to take. Slowly, she cradled the package against her chest, and a soft, almost imperceptible smile spread across her face. She murmured a tiny thank you, before backing toward the door, her steps tentative but quicker now, driven by hunger and the warmth of unexpected kindness. The CEO watched her leaning back in his chair, feeling a flicker of something unfamiliar. A mix of satisfaction, curiosity and anticipation. The streets outside were slick with rain, each step sending small ripples through puddles. The little girl moved quickly, careful to balance the package in her arms. Her excitement was tempered by caution, the kind that comes from living in a world that rarely offers gifts without strings attached. She found shelter beneath an awning, kneeling to unwrap the package with shaking hands. Inside were the remnants of a luxurious meal, yet to her, it was a feast. The fish, vegetables, and sweet dessert were more than food. They were a signal that someone had seen her, acknowledged her struggle, and offered help without expectation. Back inside the restaurant, the CEO returned his attention to his table, yet he could not fully refocus on his papers or his phone calls. His thoughts kept drifting back to the girl, the curve of her small shoulders, the careful way she carried the food, the brief spark of joy in her eyes. For all the money, power and influence he commanded, this simple human connection felt unexpectedly profound. It was a reminder that some of the most meaningful acts in life were small, unplanned, and rooted in empathy rather than ambition. The restaurant's atmosphere settled into a quiet rhythm again, though the memory of the encounter lingered. Waiters and staff exchanged knowing glances, accustomed to witnessing the eccentricities of the wealthy. Yet something about this act of giving felt different. It was neither ostentatious nor performative. It was quiet, unassuming, and yet charged with meaning. The act of handing over leftovers, something most would consider trivial, had created a moment of connection that was almost tangible in its intensity. Outside, the little girl devoured the food with careful delight, savoring each bite as though it were a treasure. Her hunger was finally assuaged, her energy restored, and her small heart lifted with gratitude. She looked up occasionally as if half expecting the man to appear again, to acknowledge her joy or perhaps smile in recognition. But the city around her remained vast and indifferent, a maze of streets, neon and endless possibilities. Yet in that small act of kindness, a ripple had begun, one that would weave through her life and unexpectedly through the life of the CEO himself. Inside the restaurant, he watched the city through the rain-streaked glass, his thoughts unusually quiet. He reflected on the nature of influence, wealth and responsibility. For years his focus had been on numbers, contracts, and power, yet this simple act reminded him that life's true impact often came not from balance sheets or strategic moves, but from human connection. The girl, unseen by most, had become a point of focus, a reminder that generosity, even in small doses, had consequences beyond immediate comprehension. Time moved forward, though the memory of the encounter seemed suspended in the golden haze of the restaurant lights. The CEO sat alone, pondering the significance of the night, the rain continuing its relentless descent outside. He did not yet know the ways in which this small act of giving, a handful of food wrapped and handed over in the storm, would affect his world. Nor could he have imagined that this fleeting connection, born of hunger and compassion, would come full circle, challenging his assumptions, his methods, and ultimately, his very understanding of success and human value. The little girl disappeared into the rain, her small figure swallowed by the city's vastness, leaving behind only the echo of possibility. Yet in that echo, in the quiet, reflective moments that followed, a subtle understanding took root, that influence and power were not only measured in wealth, contracts, or prestige, but in the unassuming acts of kindness that ripple outward, unseen, shaping lives in ways no one could predict. And as the rain continued to fall, glossing the streets in silver light, the seeds of something extraordinary were quietly sown in both their lives, awaiting the moment when destiny would call them back together.